let's see what happens. He kind of measured it from there. He's going back. That very may well be it. The people are excited. They like this.
I can hear his engines revving now.
Air Jordan ready to take off.
In Chicago.
That's got to be a 50 ball. He took off just a little inside that.
Basketball is one of the greatest sports in terms of storytelling. LeBron versus Durant, it's Kobe versus Shaq.
The storylines that get generated by athletes and by sport culture, I think really mimic what people are searching for, and that's what Nike stands for, is this idea of unlocking human potential. So we love the possibility. There's always the opportunity. There's the underdog story. There's the favorite. There is so many things.
Before we let the stories of the past shape your future, it would mean the world to me if you could follow us or subscribe on whatever platform you're listening to us. Enjoy the conversation. So, without any further ado, Brandon, let the stories of the past
shape your future on the
Quoting Life podcast.
Scott Munson, what an honor to have you on. Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys. Happy to be here.
So, first question we typically ask our guests as we try to tell people stories on this podcast is the beginning, the opening chapters. And I'm really curious to see, what would those opening chapters be for you? Because as we're going to dig deep into this conversation, Nike is for sure one of the greatest stories ever told. But what makes that company's stories so great is because of all the people that have worked for that company. And so I'm really curious as to see, what are your early beginnings? What are those initial chapters?
Okay. Well, I'd always been captivated by the Nike brand. I grew up, in the era of Jordan, the era, I was a soccer player. So, this idea of the positioning they had in soccer called brilliant football was unique and different and exciting. And there was a commercial I remember called Good versus Evil that just, got me into this idea of, I think I want to be a marketer. I'm really excited about this brand like Nike because they've just tapped into some sort of world that's exciting to me, and it's in sports. But my first chapter would be sort of, I guess, the athlete. I played soccer at a pretty high level that led to an opportunity in college. It led to an opportunity playing for Canada, and it led to a couple of years of playing professional. But I think the game of soccer was a teacher for me. There were so many values it taught about hard work and camaraderie and dedication, and I guess honesty and integrity, and all those things were just built into the game. And so I thought, what could you work in the sports industry? Is that a job? You didn't know. And you were like, who are these people that might be working for Nike? So soccer gave me a chance to work in the sports industry for our local professional team, the Vancouver 86ers. I was playing for them, but then I had an opportunity to go into the front office and work for them. And it was fascinating. I was doing marketing and sales, and I was hustling, and I was trying to sell the game day program sponsorship, and I was trying to run the games, running events, holding the seasonal games in the stadium at Swangard Stadium. I wouldn't trade the experience for the world, but it was hard. And so that got me into it. I would say that's probably my first chapter as an athlete and getting into the sports industry and saying, this is what I want to do for a living. And Nike came calling after that, but that could be a different chapter.
And sticking to sports, you've mentioned there about all the lessons it teaches you. And, often just saying that people who've played soccer say it's football is life, or things along those lines. And I was watching this year's, finals, whether it's the Super Bowl, 100 million viewers, NBA Finals, 12 million viewers, the World Cup last year, over 1.5 billion viewers total. And I was thinking the other day, what is it about sports that makes it so that everyone tunes into it? And I think from my perspective, it's the stories. And seeing how you're the VP of basketball for Nike, I think basketball is one of the greatest sports in terms of storytelling because of how it's 5v5, but often there's so many matchups. It's LeBron versus Durant. It's Kobe versus Shaq. There's so many stories within sports, and I think that's what makes sports so entertaining to everyone. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think you're tapping into it. I mean, the storylines that get generated by athletes and by sport culture, I think really mimic what people are searching for, and that's what Nike stands for, is this idea of unlocking human potential. So we love the possibility. There's always the opportunity. There's the underdog story. There's the favorite. There is so many things, and in this culture, we love a winner. And so there's always it's just so tempting, and I think just that possibility is something that continues to drive people. And sports, is a form of escapism, and it's a form of dreaming and dreaming big. You mentioned soccer being the global game in terms of its democracy of it. And the one word that you talk to kids when they're really young around the world is that just keeps them dreaming and playing, is this idea of hope. And that is for the fan as well. And so I think that's what sports taps into.
Yeah. Um, when I in the stadium and there's people surrounding me, there's like energy, there's chanting. It feels really energetic, and I really love the feeling that it gives me. The sports, the stories, and all of that, I love following it. For Nike, why do you think it's so influential? Why do you think it's such a sports brand that people follow?
Well, we're a company that was, founded by runners for runners. So our founders, Bill Knight and Bill Bowerman, that's what they were, and the early employees were just the consumer. They were the athletes, and they knew what they needed, and they were just driven to serve athletes. So we've always had at the core of our identity, our DNA, is to always, listen to the voice of the athlete. And we've been saying that inside this place for 50 years. And so that just rings true still today. I would also say that, we've always, made sure that we are a youth brand. So we stay young, and speak to youth and speak to the next generation. We've always been grounded in this idea of being an innovation brand. And that has helped us sort of move the sports performance and industry forward. And we sort of never rest. We're every season or every year trying to reinvent ourselves from a product standpoint to make athletes better. And then I spoke, the third thing is just, human potential. And I spoke to that. And that's manifested it in sort of our motto, just do it. Or another interpretation of it is there is no finish line. Those things have been grounding us for a long time. And it evolves and changes a little bit over time, but at its core stays the same. And right now, we sort of have our vision of this idea of make sport a daily habit. And that's sort of the athlete asterisk, we call it. If you have a body, you're an athlete. And it's just trying to be relevant to everybody. Sport should be a right, we believe. It's not always. So how do you access that? And we think sport can change lives and help build communities. So those are the things we're grounded on. And that's why we're passionate about it. And I think that's some of those principles, that grounding is what has made this brand so strong and so successful.
And you mentioned two things there, innovation and just do it. And when you mentioned those two things, the thing that instantly pops to mind is risk taking. And just recently, I've watched the new Air movie, and it was so brilliantly portrayed, about Sonny Vaccaro's story and how he pinpointed Michael Jordan off of that shot when he was with North Carolina. And the movie really portrays how he just took a huge risk. And then, Phil at the beginning of the movie, he's uncertain, but then he taps into those roots of Nike and says, yeah, we're going to go for it. And just do it is really an emblem of that risk-taking factor. And I'm wondering, throughout your 26 years of Nike, how has risk-taking played a role in your career?
Well, I'm lucky because in my personal life, I'm risk averse. But at Nike, you get really encouraged to take risks if it's a calculated risk, and when I say that is like what's championed here is this idea of instinct and gut. And that's the way Phil in the movie Air was portrayed. And that's really what he and leadership have been like. And if you are sort of listening to the voice of the athlete, if you feel you've got the right insight and your gut says, go do something, it's right. The company will back you. It's amazing. And we've always been an irreverent brand. We've always taken on issues. Decades ago, we were the first to openly advertise support for a long distance runner with AIDS. We just a couple of years ago took on the idea of equality in sport. We got behind Colin Kaepernick. So we're not afraid to take a stand on cultural issues and issues that are important to advance sport forward. And all these examples are models for the employees of today, the culture of today. So yeah, it's we are a little bit more sophisticated in this day and age, more of a modern marketing machine where we do a little bit more of, the balance of the art and science. But deep down, we're a company that trusts our gut.
Maybe I might catch you a bit off guard, but do you have a favorite just do it moment at Nike?
Wow. That's a really good one. I would say, I'll just say one that comes to mind really quickly is, a few years ago, I was in a role that built the apparel for global football, we call it, or soccer. And I was the head of apparel, and that means being responsible for all the uniforms for big tournaments like the World Cup. And this was us preparing for 2018, so it would have been back in like 2017 probably. And we were taking a bit of a risk on a really bold design and collection around Nigeria.
Mm.
And it was called Nija. And it didn't sit well with some leaders inside the company. They thought we were off base. They didn't think it was authentic. Whole bunch of reasons why. And we just said, you know what, we're just going to do it. Like, this is what we believe. And I got behind the team. And that's what I think strong leadership looks like. When you feel like the team is right, you back them. And so for me, I rolled the dice a little bit there because it wasn't popular, but it turned out to be a great decision. It was great product. It was great storytelling, and it was super successful. And if you look now on a lot of the publications ranking best uniforms of all time for World Cups, Nigeria is in the top 5. So it was really cool.
That was definitely one of my favorite kits of all time, 100%.
Scott, so it sounds like you made a big decision and you stood by it. And as I'm talking to more and more people, I'm realizing that the most successful people and the most successful brands make big decisions quickly and they stand by it. And I see that as boldness. So do you have any stories about your upbringing or any societal factors that you believe contributed and grew your boldness?
Yeah, I think you're onto something. I spent, 18 years of my career in marketing here. And so you're encouraged and groomed to be bold and to kind of swing big. And I think so you kind of learn it a little bit over time. I would say that just my competitiveness, being brought up as an athlete, or just, I guess, competitive spirit anyway. Like, I don't like losing at ping pong, and let alone, on the field of play. So there's a competitive spirit that I think burns as an athlete. I think when you start to work with, teams, and I tend to thrive in like small teams, and I do think small teams can kind of be nimble, and, we call them like a SWAT team or a tiger team here at Nike. A lot of times to get something done and to do something that's going to break through, you got to kind of go outside the process a little bit. So I've had experiences working on some of these teams. And so I think that also breeds the culture, of trying to be bold, and we use a word a lot, this idea of disrupt, because it's really easy to fall into a sea of sameness or a comfort zone or the status quo. And so we're always trying to push. And I think all of us can succumb to it. I mean, I just actually came from a meeting where a colleague of mine said, "Hey, I think we can be bigger and bolder here. I think we can do things differently." And we're just in the room. We're like, "You're right. You're right." Because you kind of just get on the hamster wheel and you go into season by season. And sometimes it's good just to step back and go, "Hey, what is this all adding up to? Are we really thinking big enough? And then what do we have to disrupt, or what do we have to do differently to kind of get out of that thinking?"
And I think so much of it as well, it's because of this, you mentioned it before, but how Nike stays youthful. And that's something that I find so rare because if you look at most companies' life cycle, they start off young and then suddenly they become this corporate environment with the suit and the ties. And
Yeah.
Nike is so opposite to that. And even now you mentioned in teams, is there anything you do to, and someone new in your team comes in, is there anything you try to instill in them to have that disruption mindset? Or do they already have it when they come in?
Well, we have certain leadership principles, in the company. There's like 12 of them, and when we evaluate people on those principles, some of them they're kind of, they're a third of them are based off of personal growth, a third of them are based off of team growth, and then a third of them are based off of business growth. And, one of the biggest ones is cultivate innovation, right? And I think that's the sort of dream big mentality. And so you're encouraged to look at that, to understand that, and to see how, what kind of impact you're having on the organization, from that capacity. So I think that's something, that helps. I mean, there's no sort of like standard onboarding. I think the culture has to help you get there. I think, a little bit of rigor in terms of you developing and looking to round out yourself. I think that's really important. As you sort of like try to look at, being disruptive. I mean, I think the other thing we would say is, how are you making sure that everything you do is consumer centric? It's really easy to get internal. So how are you making sure that you are serving the consumer in a new and better way? And it can't just be new; it's got to be new and better. Do we really understand who we're serving? Yes, we're a brand that's bought by multiple, consumer segments and multiple age ranges. But we've got to make sure that we are speaking to youth differently than we are serving somebody who might need a running shoe for us later in life. So it's something that's really, really architected and really surgical on how we're serving consumers. But it's like, be consumer centric, know who your consumers are, and be an expert.
It's interesting because there you speak about how you need to know who your consumers are. And I know from our previous conversations, you're a very good listener. And I'm wondering, is that something that you found extremely useful in your career as well? Where do you listen to people differently? Are you able to identify different types of characters and you're able to adapt your leadership style to these people? Or is it more so you have one general philosophy and kind of apply it to that? I'm curious.
Well, I'm not sure everybody in my life, especially close to me, would say I'm a great listener, but I appreciate that, Adam. I would say in business, you know, I I don't think there's like one way. I think you do have to be adaptive, but you've got to be authentically adaptive to different work styles. There's obviously different personality types that you're leading and working with, and everybody, well, those different personality types respond differently to motivation, to feedback. So you've got to be really in tune with who you're working with, and sensitive and empathetic. And I think that's something that I've been working on over time, is to be, more aware of how my behavior impacts people I work with. Um, I've always been really curious, and I think I've always liked to sort of learn and understand and go deeper. So I do sort of listen intently, but with the intention of understanding. Sometimes I ask a lot of questions and people are like, whoa, what's this guy doing? And I'm like, I actually really love your idea. I want to really boil it down so that it's bulletproof, because let's go forward with this thing. This is amazing. And another thing I learned in doing some consumer research and insight work in this company is that it's actually quite beneficial to ask questions and not fill the space. Like, let the silence linger and let the person you've asked the question to fill the space. Give them time and see where it leads. Because all too often we want to answer the question for somebody or fill it with our own bias. So I think just sort of like, practicing that is really important. And then one other thing I would say that we get taught a lot, when you're trying to brainstorm, and I'm sure you guys might do the same, is the idea of yes and. Very simple, but you're listening to somebody and you acknowledge that you've heard them and you want to build on that idea.
And your conversation skills, wanting to develop them, showing your inner curiosity in others, how deep do you go in someone? Like, I know normally when I talk to friends, we the people I'm not as close to, we go surface level. But the people I'm familiar with, the people I've lived with, my family, we go pretty deep. But I'm wondering about your conversational style. Like, when you meet someone new joins your team and you want to learn about them, how deep do you go?
Well, Brent, I've been the same way until recently. A lot of my career, probably, another generation like mine is sort of kept work and play or personal separate, and just kind of did surface, from a personal standpoint. So I think, Nike's a relationship company, and you are really effective here navigating what we call our organizational matrix if you are good at relationship building. And that's something that I've had to really work at. And I've gotten better at it over time. And I would think recently, you just learn that you need to invest in people, and they need to know that it's not just transactional. And so that's something I'm always working at. And if it's not just transactional, they feel like you care and you're involved, and there's a rapport, and it's more about not just the work. And you tend to earn the trust of people, and then you start to becoming more of a high functioning team, or a high functioning relationship. So personally, I work at that. I'm not there yet. I'm not a finished article at all. More work to come. But I would say that when you start to work in teams, you've got the high functioning teams have to be able to have great conversation, great debate, be able to go back and forth, be able to push each other, and it all feel like you're still in a safe place. And I think what you guys might find is, I've been here a long time. I can count on my hand, the number of high functioning teams I've been on, and it's special. and you want to cherish it. And usually you've got some sort of like really great goal that you're going for, or a really cool project, or you're just in the right spot at the right time.
And it's so interesting because if you tie it back to sports, all the great teams, it always seems as if behind the scenes they also have this amazing relationship. And I can liken, Man City the other day, they won the Champions League, and you see them after the game, and it really does seem as if they come across as friends, even though they're technically working colleagues. Or even yesterday when the Denver Nuggets won the NBA Finals, you see Jokic bring Jamal Murray in the pool, and they
Yeah.
really do seem as if they've been friends for the longest amount of time.
I really feel like the examples you gave, and some other teams of recent champions, everybody really understands their role and accepts it.
Hmm.
And I think when you have everyone buying in to that concept, you have a chance. And I think, this idea of next person up, which kind of started a couple years in baseball, I think, that mentality, I think is really helpful to building winning teams, or positive work environments. But it did seem like, these championship teams, they all sign up for the mission, and they kind of understand what they're being asked to do, and they do that role that, the coach or the strategist believe is the most important, for the greater good.
I hate to do this to you, but I do have to put you a bit on the spot. What's your favorite player and favorite team of all time, and why?
Wow. Well, I'm gonna go back in time. Um, and I grew up a Manchester United fan,
Yes.
and I'll stay with soccer, but then maybe I'll come back to hockey. Um, and I was just uh, in awe of Eric Cantona,
Hmm.
who was just this mercurial figure from France, who was a little bit arrogant, um, but just could back it up with the bravado on the field, and just was a legend. And I just loved his leadership, his creativity, his charisma. So that's where as a soccer player, as a soccer geek, but obviously growing up in Canada, I and born in Montreal, I was encouraged to be a Canadiens fan, and I just thought Guy Lafleur was the best.
Hmm.
The flower hair flowing down the ice, scoring big goals, winning Stanley Cups. As a young kid, that's who captivated me.
You have these models in mind, and to someone who's in the stands, they're almost like a god. They're someone really special, someone you want to become, and someone you're always behind no matter what. And I believe in the corporate world, there's always a fear of judgment and criticism, and you always want to be at the top. So how do you overcome the fear of judgment? How do you like take in the criticism and build on it?
Yeah, I mean, it's never easy putting yourself on the line, if you have to present or take a point of view. I think definitely a lot of people can struggle with, having to make a decision, or, you know, being responsible for a decision. I think, culturally it helps if that's encouraged, and you have people who are looking to help you grow and invest in your future. And you usually find that in most roles, most companies, they want to see you grow and develop. I do think trial and error helps. I do think you have to kind of put yourself out there sometimes. It can be uncomfortable, but the more times you do it, the better you can become. I do think having peer support, having a mentor, um, all of that can really help as you grow and tackle new situations. Um, but I know, if public speaking isn't your thing, how can you look to overcome that? How can you find ways to make that work? And it just depends on exactly what you want to do, and how you want to be seen, and what you need to work on. But I think if you identify some of those things and you work with a manager who's going to help you grow and help you sort of, I guess, be empowered to get better, that can be a pretty liberating and empowering place to be.
And Scott, one last question. So, as a tradition from our podcast, we like to share a quote from the previous guest and get your thoughts on it. So, this quote comes from a serial entrepreneur who's been in the tech industry. And the quote goes, "Don't worry, everything will be amazing." What are your thoughts?
Well, I love the positivity of it, and I think it's a way to say, hey, we can get over obstacles, together. And I think it's the power of positive thinking is really can take people that extra distance. People remember how you make them feel, not necessarily, what you say. And I think that's a great one to say, hey, let's envision the future we want.
Thank you so much, Scott.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for making it to the end of this episode. As a growing channel, it would be so amazing if you would take one more minute of your day to reshare this episode on any platform you're liking. Hope to see you next week.